that the Minister will go into. You will recall that the Minister addressed the nation last month and put together a National Investigative Task Team, and they have done their work, and that report will be given to us now. Minister, without further ado, I will hand over to you.
Thank you. A very good afternoon, everybody, and thank you and good morning to members of the media and to all South Africans following this briefing. Today I'm briefing the public on the interim findings and the recommendations by the National Investigative Task Team, the NITT, who are here with us today, who are going to be answering your technical questions, who are going to be going into deep discussion around what some of the work that they did and some of the findings that they found. This briefing follows the NITT's presentation and its interim findings and recommendations to the Department of Basic Education and to Umalusi this week. Earlier today, Umalusi certified the credibility and the integrity of the 2025 NSC examinations. As part of this process, they engaged with the interim findings and recommendations placed before it by the NITT. In welcoming Umalusi's certification, I wanted to be clear. Umalusi's certification today is a clear assurance that every candidate, every guardian and every parent, that the NSC 2025 remains credible. As I've stated previously, this breach was detected through the strength of our marking and quality assurance systems. Markers are our first line of defense. The fact that anomalies were identified, escalated through established protocols demonstrates that the NSC system is designed to detect irregularities and act decisively to protect honest learners. Let me reiterate, we will not compromise the future of thousands of honest learners because of the actions of a few. We will not leave any stone unturned in ensuring accountability and safeguarding the credibility of the NSC certificate. In recognition of the seriousness of this matter and the need for clear independence, the Director General established the National Investigative Task Team last month. We have been clear from the start that the department would not conduct an investigation on this matter internally and that an independent process was essential to ensure public confidence. The NITT is chaired by Professor Skhole, the former Dean of Faculty of Education in the University of Pretoria, who's seated right here with me. Mr. Brian Schrouder, who's the Deputy Chair of the NITT, and he's the former Superintendent General of the Western Cape Department of Education. Its members included education experts, labor, union representatives, SACA representation, and Umalusi as an observer. The task team's work was conducted independently, with the department providing logistical and technical support only, so not to interfere with the task team's deliberations. This independence is essential for public confidence and to Umalusi's oversight role in safeguarding the credibility of the NSC. To ensure meaningful investigation, the NITT interpreted its mandate to include establishing both the source of the breach and the spread and the extent of the breach, identifying the learners who accessed leaked materials, and recommending how to address the breach to protect the credibility of the 2025 NSC and to prevent reoccurrence. To make sure its findings are reliable, the NITT checked the facts in several ways. It looked at digital forensics, data patterns, additional marking checks, interviews with learners, invigilators, chief markers, and relevant officials. They'll be going into deeper detail with you on this kind of work. This means that the findings are based on evidence and that they are fair and balanced. This approach strengthens the confidence in the interim conclusions that they are evidence-led and they are proportionate. It must also be noted that other examination irregularities do occur. However, irregularities not linked to this specific breach fall outside of the NITT's mandate, and they are dealt with through the established Provincial Examination Irregularities Committee and the National Examination Irregularities Committee. Based on the evidence thus far, the NITT reports that the breach appears to have started with the department's secure exam paper system environment. This is where question papers are set, handled, and stored. The NITT further reports that the department official whose child wrote the NSC 2025 exam is alleged to have been involved, and that the learner shared material further. The NITT is still verifying whether the second official was involved. Importantly, the forensic work is still ongoing to confirm exactly how and from which computer the papers were taken. That work has been expanded, and investigations with law enforcement are continuing. Based on the evidence available to date, the NITT reported that the breach was contained to 40 candidates in the Tshwane area and therefore is localized. 40 is a very small number in comparison to the 900,000 candidates who wrote the NSC examinations in 2025. In communicating these findings, the department will avoid publicly naming the schools. The NITT looked at school patterns only to help spot unusual results. If wrongdoing is confirmed, it will be linked to individuals and not blamed on whole schools unless there's clear evidence of that. The NITT's message to us is clear. Because the number of implicated candidates is so small, the NSC remains credible. This allows us to release the results for the overwhelming majority while the official process runs for those who are implicated. As our usual system-wide checks did not show signs that the exams were affected more widely, supporting the conclusion that the matter was contained and not widespread. The NITT reported that evidence currently confirms that 7 papers were leaked, which were limited to English home language, Maths paper 1 and 2, and physical sciences. The NITT also reported that the leaked materials were shared through a combination of digital, physical means, including USB drives, electronic messaging, screenshots, and printed copies. The task team cautioned us as a department that evolving technologies, including AI-enabled tools, can be used to disguise misconduct. Now, this reinforces the need for us to modernize for the prevention, detection, and invigilation control. The NITT's recommendation results for the implicated 40 candidates. On the NITT's recommendation, results for the 40 implicated candidates will be withheld temporarily while the official irregularity processes are completed. As part of these processes, each of the 40 candidates will be subjected to an independent hearing. Where a candidate is found guilty by an independent presiding officer, this finding, together with the recommendations, will go to the Provincial Examination Irregularity Committee, thereafter the National Examination Irregularity Committee, and ultimately Umalusi will be the final arbiter. Candidates found guilty may have their results of their relevant subjects nullified and may be further sanctioned. Sanctions include bars from writing those subjects up to 3 examination sessions. This is due process. Umalusi indicated that it is satisfied with the NITT's interim findings and recommendations, and that these have been accepted as the basis for protecting the integrity of the exams as a whole. Going forward, Umalusi will continue monitoring developments and will ensure correct processing so that non-implicated candidates receive their results, while any verified new implications are actioned appropriately. To be clear, examination irregularities not linked to a specific breach continue to be processed through the normal processing. Now, I want to address the issue of consequence management, security strengthening, and ongoing oversight. The department has already taken steps to address the alleged internal involvement of its own officials, including the precautionary suspension of suspected officials earlier in this process. In addition, the department is implementing the NITT's recommendations to institute investigations and disciplinary proceedings against implicated officials. Additionally, the NITT will continue forensic investigations into unlawful access and distribution in order for us to support the criminal proceedings where evidence warrants it. To those who compromise the NSC, they don't only break rules, but they also attempt to steal opportunities from honest learners. We will pursue accountability through every appropriate disciplinary process, including the criminal proceedings. As indicated previously, the matter has been reported to the South African Police Service in order for this to be investigated for its criminal elements. Additionally, a forensic service provider was appointed to investigate electronic devices, relevant evidence that may have facilitated this breach. The forensic scope has been expanded to establish the extraction source, the timeline, and to corroborate any involvement of any additional suspects as applicable. What we are also doing is we are strengthening our security and invigilation in line with the NITT's recommendations. So, on our side, we will tighten security from start to finish, especially on how question papers are handled, stored, managed, and in secure environments. We will increase monitoring in high-risk centers based on evidence. We will standardize checks before candidates enter exam rooms. We will act on weak invigilation and strengthen oversight while recognizing the practical limits of some venues. We will update our controls for new technology risks, including wearables and technologically enabled tactics used to hide cheating. We are also strengthening digital security in the examinations environment, tightening who can access systems, using secure ways to move files, strengthening encryption, and controlling the use of USB drives. The NITT's work will continue, and they will elaborate on this. This includes triangulation, investigative marking, and additional interviews. This is important for the sake of thoroughness. The NITT may refine its recommendations, particularly on strengthening security within secure examination environments. Where further verified developments emerge, the Department and Umalusi retain the right and the ability to act accordingly, consistent with due process and the integrity of the system. Before I close and I hand over to the NITT chair, I would like to provide an update on the EduMarks matter where the 2024 NSC candidate data was unlawfully traded ahead of the official results release. The DBE initiated a forensic cybersecurity investigation into how the 2024 results data was handled and where the system was vulnerable. The investigation made clear recommendations, and we have put a practical plan in place to act on them. Put simply, we are tightening security across the entire results process. We are strengthening control over how results are distributed. We are requiring the use of approved secure file system. We are tightening access and login controls. We are strengthening encryption and data protection. And we are putting stronger safeguards in place to prevent data from being copied or leaked, backed by clear protocols and ongoing cybersecurity training. For the 2025 NSC results, all universities, through Universities South Africa and the media, will only receive results under embargo 24 hours before the official release. And going forward, every partner in the results supply chain will be subject to vulnerability audits because protecting the integrity of the NSC is an absolute non-negotiable. In closing, I want to thank the NITT for its independent work, its rigorous work, including sustained work throughout the festive period. I also want to thank the department officials and the professionals who supported the investigation so that we can make sure that the integrity of the NSC is protected. South Africa can have confidence that the NSC remains credible. Irregularities are detected, investigated thoroughly, and addressed through firm accountability while protecting the integrity of the qualification for the overwhelming majority of honest learners. Finally, I want to thank every candidate who remained honest, focused throughout this process. Congratulations on reaching this point. It is a significant achievement. To those who may not have been successful, please do not be disheartened. This is not the end of your journey. There are pathways to improve your results and keep moving forward. As we look ahead to the release of the NSC results on Monday, I want to encourage you to keep believing in your potential. Whether you go on to further study or to the world of work, you now step into a new chapter with the opportunity to build livelihoods and achieve great things and to contribute to the growth of South Africa. Your country is proud of you, and we look forward to seeing the difference that you will make. And now, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to hand over to the chair and the deputy chair, and they will take you through the technicalities of the investigation that they conducted.
Thank you very much, Minister. Deputy Minister, Director General, officials from the Ministry and Department of Basic Education, members of the National Investigative Task Team, members of the media, fellow South Africans. On behalf of the NITT, I would like to express our appreciation to the Minister of Basic Education through the DG for appointing us to carry out this investigation on behalf of the department. We'd like to express our appreciation to the department for the support it gave us as a task team while affording us space to carry out while affording us the space to carry out this task independently. Before presenting this report, let me first thank the task team members for their sacrifices they made in carrying out this work under difficult circumstances and time frames. Sincere thank you to your families for their understanding and support during this period. I will now present the report.
Just working on it. Just working. Small technical glitch.
Okay, sorry, there is a small technical glitch. All right.
They just want to flight it on there.
All right. Should I wait?
Yeah, just give it a second.
You can follow it like following a sun.
It's gonna come on. Did you do a dry run?
It was up.
Oh.
Yeah,
It was
when
up.
it came in. It was up. You can give it to me and I can advance it. And if that document doesn't do it, it's not connected.
Give you what?
Just the USB.
Oh, the
Take it out.
USB.
Oh, sorry.
What's wrong with this? What happened?
I think you, perhaps, Prof, you can continue, and as soon as it comes up,
When
there
it
it is.
comes up.
Yeah.
There it is. Yeah.
I think it was the USB. I shipped somewhere.
So you're not trying it from
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, as we are all aware, I'll provide first the background to the investigation. How the Department of Education alerted the Department of Basic Education to an unusual similarity between the answers provided by a candidate with answers provided in the marking guideline for English Home Language Paper 2. This suggested an exam leak. Between the 2nd and the 11th of December, the department conducted its own investigation. 26 learners were linked to this incident across 7 schools. 21 of the learners originally linked to this incident were interviewed. The department learned that the source of the leak was internal to the DBE National Exams Office. The National Investigation Task Team was appointed by the Director General to investigate the leaks and to report to Umalusi on the 6th of January before the release of the results on the 13th January 2026. And Minister has covered the membership of the task team, and those are the time frames we went through. We were appointed on the 15th of December, and we had our inaugural meeting on the 16th of December, and we were busy throughout the festive season. The mandate of the NITT was to establish the source of the breach, and I want to elaborate a bit on that. The original brief was to confirm the source of the breach, as well as to establish the spread of the breach. And we said to the DBE, we cannot confirm anything. We need to establish the source of the leak and also to establish the spread of the breach and to identify learners that access the leaked exam materials. the minister has already covered this point about the fact that we only investigate matters that are linked to this particular leak. Other irregularities are taken care of elsewhere. Now, and this will be of interest to everybody, how did we go about conducting our work? The NITT aligned its work with the DBE protocols previously used in investigations of this nature, including forensic investigation, statistical analysis, investigative marking, learner interviews, interviews with invigilators. And given the nature of the problem we are dealing with, we asked that we add the last bullet there, which is interviews with chief markers, because we wanted to really scan the whole field in order to trace the extent to which this leak might have spread. The NITT turned these areas of investigation into work streams. And therefore, we had the forensic investigation work stream, the statistical analysis work stream, the investigative marking work stream, learner interviews work stream, invigilators work stream, and chief markers work stream. These were the methods which we used in gathering data. And all these work streams were informed by 3 questions. The first one is, what is the source of the leak? Number 2, what is the spread of the leak? Number 3, who are the candidates involved? Coming to the source of the leak, this was mainly attended to by the forensic investigation work stream. The department appointed a private forensic company to conduct a forensic investigation on the electronic devices that may have been used in facilitating the breach. This includes cell phones, laptops, smartwatches, and any other electronic device. The forensic investigation team provide the technical expertise in tracing the source of the leak. And in the context of this particular investigation, Mora Incorporated was appointed to conduct an investigation of the electronic devices that may have been used in facilitating this breach, and those are indicated there. We further relied on oral evidence with learners, which was conducted by the learners interviews work stream. As well, we also relied on the written statements by learners, which were analyzed by the learner interviews work stream. And as the NITT, the deputy chair and myself interviewed suspected officials, including the son of the official. From the 12th to the 23 December 2025, the forensic company forensically imaged 11 items, including desktops and laptops and exam servers. CCTV cross-analysis was conducted, and the next phase of the analysis is continuing at the moment. The second point which I want to go to is the spread of the leak. The spread of the leak was driven by the statistical analysis work stream. 26 candidates across 7 schools were originally implicated. Following a whistleblower alert, 3 schools from the Northwest were identified as suspicious. The purpose of the use of statistical analysis method was to widen the investigation to identify any anomalous trends in the exam marks of learners as well as subjects. A statistical analysis of learners' exam marks was initially conducted in the 10 identified schools. I need to add that in the Northwest there were 3 suspicious schools, and we added that to the 7 that were identified by the DBE that made up 10 schools. So the statistical analysis of learner exam marks was initially conducted in the 10 identified schools to identify additional learners with higher than expected marks in the subjects under investigation. The analysis was then extended to all schools in the province and countrywide for higher than expected average marks. Learner level analysis was also conducted in suspicious schools. The third aspect which I want to touch on in terms of the spread of the leak was conducted by the Investigative Marking and Verification work stream. The Department of Basic Education has got trained markers who are both skilled in the marking and in the identification of specific trends in the responses of candidates that warrants further investigation. This entails, inter alia, common wrong answers, verbatim responses to the marking guideline, identical, similar answers across learners in a center, deletion of the same answers and replacement with the same response, exceptionally high scores in the batch of scripts. Investigative marking was applied where and were based on statistical analysis pointed to possible suspicious outcomes. All scripts from these centers in the subject paper were scrutinized to identify anomalous patterns pointing to irregularities. Attention was given to identical or near identical responses, replication of marking guideline wording or solution structures, reproduction of incorrect responses appearing only in the pre-standardization of marking guidelines. It further scrutinized identical sequence of steps in higher order questions and performance patterns inconsistent with demonstrated conceptual understanding. The investigative marking took place in 3 phases. In the first phase, it focused on selected subjects, which include physical sciences, English home language, life sciences, and mathematics. 7 schools located in Tshwane and 3 in a region in the northwest were profiled. In phase 2 and 3, investigative marking was extended to include additional centers and subjects. This sought to broaden the investigation, drawing from the statistical analysis indicators. In total, 17 centers were investigated by the Investigation, Marking, and Verification work stream. These centers were identified based on multiple factors, which include statistical analysis, learner interviews, and statements. The following subjects were audited for each center: economics, geography, physical sciences, mathematics, life sciences, and English home language scripts for paper 1, 2, and 3. The number of candidates investigated per center ranged from 17 to over 20. 200, sorry. And the inclusion of the of the additional subjects is a demonstration of the extent to which the NITT went broader and not just confining itself to the 3 papers that were reported. The third area which we looked into was the identity of candidates in terms of the source and the spread of the leak. And that was looked into by the candidate interviews work stream. The work stream's investigation aimed to identify implicated candidates and to establish the origin of the breach and the extent of the spread of the leak. And those are the time frames which we had, which the task team followed in terms of identifying the source and the spread of the leak. I'm sorry that it's not appearing well. Let me get out of this mode. Yeah, the first phase included the interviews with learners in Tswane, and it was not only learners, it also included parents and guardians. And that is the work which was handed over to us when we started the work by the Department of Basic Education. The second phase included expanded candidate interviews and cross-verification at DBE. The third phase was interviews with invigilators and administrative verification. And furthermore, we expanded candidate interviews. And between the 20th and the 27th and the 5th of January, we continued with identification of learners, cleaning and correcting learner records and information, and as well as the last stage was the content analysis of candidate statements and interviews. And this was based on the fact that all candidates that were interviewed also had to make written statements in terms of what they were interviewed on or what they had confessed. So the NITT analyzed the statements of those learners as part of evidence gathering. An analysis of candidate statements and interview notes was conducted, and the verification and cross-validation was undertaken with other sources of evidence across all those work streams. We also had the work that was done by invigilators, work stream, and chief markers work stream that interviewed invigilators and chief markers around the country, which formed part of the corroborating evidence. Corroborating evidence on whether and how the leak may have spread was sought through interviews with invigilators and chief markers. This revealed irregularities, but they were not related to the leak under investigation. Now, the triangulation of data methods for data sources and findings is very important, because it was through triangulation that we were able to establish and to find answers to some of the information which we are looking for. Information on the data source is provided by both qualitative data that was gathered mainly through interviews. Evidence on the spread of the leak is provided by oral interviews, statistical analysis, and investigative marking. Investigative marking also confirmed the qualitative data on the identity of implicated learners. The findings regarding candidates were triangulated with learner statements, the investigative marking reports, chief markers reports. Interviews with invigilators and chief markers were important in ascertaining whether the leak had spread any further and corroborating the evidence provided in the other data sources. That is the way in which we went about conducting our investigation. Now I'm going to come to the findings. The evidence which we gathered points to the source of the leak emanating from a secured examination unit in the DBE. Secondly, the departmental official in HR whose son is in grade 12 and writing the NSC examination has been identified as the source of the leak as well. And this has been corroborated by the interviews with learners, the statements which they have made. and the son of the HR official was the source of further distribution of that material. The report confirms that the breach was localized, and current evidence indicates that it is limited to 40 learners from across 8 schools. And I want to correct that, especially for the media. Umalusi mentioned 7 schools. It is actually 8 schools in the Tshwane area. The evidence from statistical analysis, investigative marking, and learner interviews for this report confirms 7 papers leaked. English Home Language Paper 1 and 2, Paper 1, 2, and 3, Physical Sciences Paper 1 and 2, and Mathematics Paper 1 and 2. Interviews with learners pointed to more papers possibly being in circulation that involve CAT, Afrikaans, First Additional Language, Geography, and Economics. But this could not be corroborated by evidence. The investigative marking as well as statistical analysis profiled these subjects, but we could not find corroborating evidence to confirm the leak of these papers. Coming to the identity of the learners or the candidates that were involved, who was involved, or who are the candidates that had access to this papers? Candidate 1, who was the distributor of these papers after they left the DBE. Candidate 1's verbal admission and other candidate statements and oral testimony confirmed that candidate 1 received the USB with the question papers and the marking guidelines from their mother, an employee at the Department of Basic Education in Pretoria. From the 21 candidate interviews conducted and 17 candidate statements analyzed, 40 candidates in Tshwane could be identified as being implicated. The method of transmission was the use of multiple USBs, WhatsApp messages, screenshots, printed hard copies, and possibly messaging. Based on leaked marking guidelines, Meta, AI, and ChatGPT were also used by some candidates to structure and reformulate answers. Individual papers with marking guidelines were sold, as well as individual pages depending on affordability of items on finances of candidates. That is the end of our findings, and I'm now going to hand over to my colleague to present the recommendations of the NITT. Brian.
Thank you, and good morning, good afternoon. I'm just saying good afternoon, so long, Minister.
Okay. Then you need to come closer.
You have not slept anyway. You're working through the night.
All a good day. Good afternoon, colleagues. So we're coming to the end of the presentation, and we're going to speak about the recommendations. We were asked to do recommendations on our findings, and I'm linking the recommendations to the findings that we've just seen. You can understand that whenever there are problems within the examinations, it's important that we not only identify them, but find ways to resolve them and to try to ensure that it doesn't happen again. The first set of recommendations are recommendations that are general in nature. These are not directly linked to the NITT's mandate, but during our investigation, it was identified that there were a number of areas in invigilation and in writing that were not necessarily up to standard. And I think it is important that whilst the administration of the examination across the country is continuing to be improved, we have to guard very jealously the standards that are set in those writing of examinations. And so the first set of irregularities speaks to those matters that have been alluded to. The first one is we recommend that high-risk centres be monitored and that monitoring which happens be maintained. There are high-risk centres identified throughout the country in all provinces. Second recommendation is the processing of candidates prior to access to the exam room must be strengthened and made uniform in examination centres. That has to do with how the learners are prepared, how they are searched, what they have on them when they go into the exam room, when they're allowed in and when they're allowed out. And there is evidence that in some centres that did not run appropriately. The third recommendation is we have to investigate the complacency and laxity of invigilators during the examination centre. Once again, from the findings we find that the large majority of invigilators are doing a fantastic job throughout the country. But from statements that we've had and interviews that we had, there were a few centres where this appeared not to be the case. And as we had identified earlier, it could lead to the irregularities happening in exam centres that ought not to happen. Hence this recommendation. The second set of recommendations relates to the secure examinations unit within the Department of Basic Education. Having identified where the leak has come from, it's the first time that this has happened. There are recommendations that link to this specific issue, and they're not rocket science. Firstly, we recommend the conduct of an investigation into and a review of the security systems for managing, processing and storing examination papers within the DBE. Minister earlier alluded exactly to that being one of the aspects that they will look at. The second one has got to do with security involving officials. The first one is security systems. The second one is we recommend the review and the strengthening of security involving officials and their movement within the secure examination centre. Then I want to say that when we get a leak of this nature, particularly the leak of an exam paper, and in this instance also certain marking guidelines, the consequences of such a leak can be huge for the nation and huge for thousands of candidates. Therefore, the management of those consequences and consequence management flowing from that must be looked at very carefully. And so we have given a number of recommendations that particularly refers to the consequence management that results from this leak. The leak could have had severe systemic implications. Thankfully, our evidence indicates that it is localized and limited. Ongoing investigation, of course, will still continue, as the Minister indicated. So the first consequence recommendation that we wish to make is that all implicated candidates must attend formal hearings for irregularities and be processed through the normal processes in the Provincial Irregularities Committee. Second recommendation, DBE should review the sanctions of exam leakages for candidates that are caught using, buying, selling, distributing examination materials. And they should review those sanctions to include criminal charges, because some of the learners are already adult, over 18. And the reason for this is that we believe that the reviewing of the sanctions should be with a view to increasing the severity of the sanctions, so that it may be a deterrent. Because we need to have an impact where across our nation, the need and the desire for such dishonesty and irregularities must not take place. The third consequence recommendation is disciplinary proceedings and investigations should be instituted against officials implicated and by candidates in their testimonies. Now, officials are employed under the Education Labour Relations Act or the Public Service Act, and therefore there are labour requirements that mean that disciplinary action should be taken with them in the context of those regulations and legislation. I come to a second point in terms of implicated officials in a minute. The fourth recommendation is that there should be a continuance of the forensic investigation into the employees alleged to have unlawfully accessed and distributed the NSC papers. The time has been too short to pursue all forensic investigations, for example, bank accounts, for example, devices that are private devices and not necessarily the devices of the department. And so that forensic investigation, that's part of the expanded brief that the Minister referred to earlier, must continue. And then again, in terms of officials, criminal proceedings must be instituted against the employees implicated by candidates in their testimony. Make the distinction, disciplinary action because of the labour regulations, but because they are criminal offences, criminal proceedings should also be instituted where officials are found guilty. The sixth recommendation related to consequences is all examination centres and officials implicated as enabling candidates' malfeasance to occur during the writing of the examination should be addressed through the Provincial Examinations Irregularities Committee. In other words, where there's a laxity, where officials left the venue, where they did not properly observe candidates copying or any of those natures, there are proceedings, and we recommend that those proceedings should take place. And lastly, in terms of consequence management, there should be a review of the security systems for managing, processing and storing examination papers with a view to strengthening security. Again, Minister made reference to this earlier. The NITT will still refine recommendations in connection with the security within that secure system of the DBE. Lastly, I end off with the recommendations which the NITT made to Umulusi, and this morning Umulusi pronounced on them, and I just want to indicate what we recommended to Umulusi in this regard. We recommended to Umulusi that all evidence points to the fact that the integrity of the examinations as a whole for almost all of the 900,000 odd learners in the country is intact.
Into all of those things. But remember, we're working within a timeline. So we instituted, the NITT started its work on the 16th of December. And in that timeline, they've had to do important triangulation work, investigative marking, interviews, all of those things, in order for them to certify that in fact this is a localized leak and not a systemic one. And that's an important indicator to include, because it's on that basis that Umalusi can confidently say they are certifying the examinations, that the results can be released. But we're still saying that should other people come up in the process, whether it's officials or additional learners, we still have to pursue that. It's important that we are not limiting our findings to the 40. That's why the work of the NITT must continue. Because if we don't, colleagues, send a strong message now to not only officials in the department or officials or invigilators or educators in our schools who do this kind of work, if we don't send a strong message that we will find you, and when we do, you will face the full might of the law, we risk having this reoccur. And that's the importance of the NITT's continued investigation. Did the person work here? Yes, we have identified 2 of the officials work here. You asked the question, are there no safety protocols? Yes, there are. There are incredibly tight safety protocols and very few people who in the exam unit have access to those papers, and how papers are stored, and how papers are transferred. And of course, that's why there are 2 implicated officials. However, the individual that has been identified who works at HR, as the chairperson alluded, is the mother of the son, or is the mother of a child who was writing the NSC exam. That is not to imply that is the official that obtained the information. So it's very important to create the distinction. That would be the distributor but it's not necessarily the person who obtained that information. But our systems in the exam unit are tight, but we now need to review them to see who has access to it. But the person who obtained that information from the building is somebody who works at HR. So I will leave it there because, as I said, there's precautionary suspensions, and we have to make sure that due process is followed. So if I go any deeper, I worry that we may compromise ourselves. Prof, perhaps we can deal with the issue around the Northwest schools.
Yeah, the issue of the Northwest came to our attention through whistleblower alert. And as we indicated, the way in which we arrive at our findings is not just through one source, but through triangulation of the information at our disposal. So once those schools were identified through whistleblower, we profiled those schools, and investigative marking was conducted in those 3 schools. And there was no evidence found in those, through investigative marking, that those schools might be having learners who might have benefited unduly from the leaked papers. And as such, that investigation was closed. Thank you.
DG, do you mind coming here to just explain the issue around the criminal charges?
Criminal charges. Yeah, we've already opened a case against our officials, as you know, when the minister did the press briefing in December. We did indicate that. So SAPS is busy with that investigation. Part of what is going to help the forensic investigation company, as the minister said, and I'm also a bit worried that we become too open about some of these things and people who are investigating might be listening, is to get access to all possible sources that the preliminary investigation has revealed. And you can only do that through a court order. Access to your accounts, access to other things and so on. So SAPS is doing that. But the new development from the NITT is that they have now found that there are learners who are 18 years and above. And those learners can be pursued in terms of criminal charges. We've done it before, and we are going to do it with those learners who are 18 years and above. And that's what we need to pursue criminally, which is new. Thank you, Minister.
Thank you very much, DG. Minister, there's still an outstanding question on the binding nature of the recommendations of the NITT.
Oh, yes, when you asked if you could ignore them, absolutely not. We can't ignore this because the reason being is that number one, it is in our best interest to protect the integrity of the NSC results and the certificate. It's absolutely our duty to make sure that where there are weaknesses and vulnerabilities that have been identified, we must fix them. That's why the NITT did an independent investigation so that we can't even influence the recommendations they make to us. Even the report that they read out to us, to you today, is a report that is independent from us. But if we were to ignore these recommendations and something like this were to reoccur, then we are to blame for not making sure that we are fortifying our systems. Ultimately, the recommendations are designed to make sure that where there are vulnerabilities, we strengthen those. And we make sure that even one of the recommendations, for instance, is around how learners are using technology to try and cheat in examinations. Now, as a department and as a sector, we have to think about how do we fortify our systems to be able to detect those things. Times are moving. We can't still be in 10 years ago where we're simply thinking that learners are bringing crib notes in examination rooms. Now we have to make sure that our systems are responding to that. So it is in our interest, and it's in the interest of South Africans and in the interest of the integrity of the NSC that we make sure that these recommendations are implemented. And that's why earlier on I committed to saying this is what we were going to be doing as a department.
Thank you very much, Minister. Colleagues, this is the last round of questions, if there are any, and then we will close. I've got one. Follow up from the many questions. Karina, that's 3. Closed. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Minister. Veronica Makhwadia from Newsroom Africa. And you touched on something that I wanted to ask you about, and that was particularly the use of AI. We saw that that was an incident that was used there. To what extent is AI now complicating exam security, and does the department currently have the capacity to detect and prevent this type of interference, and perhaps maybe even examples of how pupils are now using it as well? We also heard about the allegations that some of the question papers were being sold by some of these students. If you can you tell us for how much? But also, how did this information as well get to the other schools? I mean, 8 schools, we have one source, but it managed to spread around. How were these kids moving around this information and, contacting each other? As you said, it's still localized without, of course, further damaging and compromising the exams. And then I think just very lastly, you say it is a localized incident and that it has not compromised the integrity of the examination results, but could this have happened before, and could it have gone undetected? I mean, we're speaking about a USB being used in a secured system, in a secured center. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Number 2.
Thanks, Fronim Timpulu again. My one question from the previous round about when the independent hearings begin and that sort of thing, and if there's a timeline for that, please can we get clarity on that? And then second question is, there was a big emphasis on that the NITT investigation was covering this particular breach. Were there other breaches that were picked up, or other leaks or other issues that were picked up with the 2025 matric exams besides this one that was identified in Tshwane? And then at some point you said that the interviews showed that there was possibly more papers that were in circulation, but this could not be corroborated. What in the interviews then suggested that there could have been more papers in circulation? I know Prof, I think, explained it a little bit, but can we just get clarity on what in those interviews suggested that there could be more papers in circulation? And if that was the feeling at the time, but it couldn't be corroborated, maybe how come that happened? And then I think my final question is just going back to the HR situation, just for clarity, and I don't know if Minister can say anymore, but just for clarity, so is Minister saying that someone else who did have access, who would legally have access to the papers, then gave the paper to the HR official who then gave it to the son? Just for clarity on that, please.
Thank you, Tony. Karina, you close.
Thank you so much, Minister. Just to confirm, for those matriculants who are caught cheating, who are under the age of 17, what action will be taken against them? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Minister, over to you.
All right. Okay. Let me start with Sonny's question, because I left it out in the previous round on the independent hearings. So the process as outlined by the NITT is as follows: that those implicated learners, one, their results will obviously be blocked, but then they must be afforded an independent hearing, which will be handled by the Provincial Irregularities Committee. That process then will finish, and then it will be handed over to the National Irregularities Committee. Now, these committees exist, which I'll come to your second question about other irregularities. They exist as a matter of course. And then ultimately, Umalosi is the final arbiter. If I'm not mistaken, the end of February is when we would like to have the entire process concluded. So that is to your question. Then I just want to also just deal with any other irregularities. Now, in any examination of this scale and of this nature, there will be irregularities that are picked up as a matter of course. I know you were at the Umalusi briefing earlier, and they had indicated that they are concerned, for instance, about some incidents of things like group copying. Now, those are irregularities that would exist as a matter of course in any examination period. That's why there are these committees that I'm talking about, the Provincial Irregularities Committee and the National Irregularities Committee. How then the department and the sector processes those irregularities is through those committees, to see the severity, to see how best to deal with these things and how to identify candidates. Is there anything that should I add around that, or will you
Sure.
come back?
I can just add one thing. Well, as you know, because you did sit for an exam at some point, there are two types of irregularities. There are those that are called administrative irregularities. Instead of writing your exam number, you write your name and surname. It's an irregularity. Irregularities such as arriving late. There are a number of them. They are administrative. But there are those that are referred to as behavioral and acts of dishonesty. These are very serious ones. These include, among others, group copying. And that's why the NITT said, we're going to look at group copying. If there's anything that links group copying to the work that we are doing, the marking guideline, which has facilitated group copying, will follow that up. And group copying, it's very unfortunate. We are very disappointed that, in fact, I think you should know that the number of learners who participated in group copying increased in 2025. It's almost doubled. And that's why even some of the measures are saying we need to step up invigilation, because if your invigilation is not tight, it facilitates group copying. Because group copying is also facilitated by teachers who are giving answers to learners, who are allowing learners to exchange answers in the exam room. So I just wanted to explain those two types of irregularities. The administrative irregularities are normal acts of dishonesty in terms of group copying. The Provincial Examination Irregularities Committees handle them, and they report. We had a meeting on the 29th for all 9 of them, reporting chaired by an independent chair, the former registrar of UCT, Mr. Yu Amo, is the one who chaired that. And in his view is that we have reduced irregularities. I think he worked out something like they've now been reduced to 0.15. Yeah, in fact, others 0.00, and the other ones are 0.14 or 15. So in his view is that we have drastically reduced irregularities over time.
Thank you, Dijan. I think that's an important distinction between the types of irregularities, because when we mention them. Then I want to I wanted to finish those questions because they were interlinked. I don't want to delve further into the officials. I think it's just important that for the purposes of the integrity of the investigation, we should leave it at that. As I said, the suspected officials are on precautionary suspension, and I think we should leave it there. Then the issue around the use of AI. Yes, of course. I think, look, education systems around the world are grappling with the use of AI, the ethics around the use of AI, and that's something we as a sector and as a country should be talking about. In fact, not so long ago, universities in South Africa were having a conversation, a serious conversation about how do they deal with the use of AI in academic integrity. So, of course, it's going to be a challenge and it's going to be complicated, but we have to rise up to the occasion. We have to ourselves figure out how do we make sure that the use of things like ChatGPT are detected. Universities are already doing that in ensuring that they deal with that issue. So we have no choice but to find the capacity to have people who will advise us on how best we deal with AI issues. Things like, for instance, the use of things like smartwatches in examination rooms. It's not just cell phones. I mean, this is a cell phone on your wrist. And so those things become incredibly important, that we move with the times as a department, that we understand that there's a far more craftier ways of cheating than they were when I was writing metric quite some time ago. I'm not entirely sure about the issue around the selling of the papers. The NITT's investigation, and even in our preliminary investigation, did confirm that there was selling of papers. How much it's something that we are unable to say. But this is part of the criminality that we are pursuing with not only those individuals who are over 18-year-olds, but also the implicated officials. Because to sell property of the state is illegal. So that is the criminality element that we are pursuing. So yes, there was evidence around them being sold, and that's the criminality element. Could this have gone undetected? I think it's a very good question. As I indicated in my opening remarks, is that this gives us really a good confidence in the system. The fact that markers were able to identify anomalies and escalate it through the right channels says to us that the system, as it is working. While yes, there are recommendations that have been given to us where we need to improve, the fact of the matter is we have skilled markers who were able to see that there are anomaly in a particular region. And very quickly they were able to use the necessary protocols. So in my view, it would have never gone undetected because our markers are our first line of defense. And they've shown us that even when there's a leak within the department, we are able to detect it at a script level. And that for me says that the system works in its various levels of checks and balances. Prof, there may have been some questions for you. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Minister. I'm going to attend to the questions related to the papers and their circulation. The issue of papers in circulation, it came from the testimonies of letters. And once, as I indicated, we triangulate information. Once something is mentioned, we go and verify. So if I remember well, we have gone through 2 rounds of investigative marking based on the information which we got from the learners that this particular paper was also is also in circulation and so on. And what we did in response to that, we subjected that particular subject to investigative marking to see any anomalous trend. And that investigative marking, we could not yielded negative results in terms of the possibilities of that paper being compromised. The second point which I want to raise is about the distribution in terms of the spread of the paper. How did it happen? It spread as a result of the network. There was apparently a network. It started with one candidate who shared that with 2 friends, and from there it started spreading across the area or the school where the implicated learners are in. And I think that's a normal, there is nothing anomalous or special about it. It was friends who had access, one friend who had access to the papers, and other friends heard about that and they had access to that.
Okay, thank you. Maybe just to confirm what the minister said about when do we want to round off hearings. Our deadline is February. But we've dealt with these matters before. If learners cooperate, their parents and their guardians do the same, we can finalize them quickly because courts have issued instructions to us. that we need to finalize them quickly so that learners are not put in a difficult position of waiting for too long. But if they don't cooperate and they don't come to hearings, then they are going to prolong, and it's going to take us a bit of time. So they will go through independent hearings, as the minister said. Access to papers in the exam, as the minister said, it's a controlled environment. There's CCTV there. I can't even get in there. We have reason to believe that access has been facilitated by people in exile, because you can't get through there unless you are in there. But we have to get evidence, because at the end of it, courts are creatures of evidence. If you don't have evidence, then your case is not going to fly. Learners who are under 18, unfortunately, we can't pursue criminal charges. We can only go insofar as applying sanctions of 1, 2, 3 exams. That's what we can do. Thank you.
Thank you very much, DG. Colleagues, that brings us to the end of this briefing. We will see each other again on the 12th of January when the Minister announces the NSC 2025 results. And then we'll see each other again on the 14th of January when the Minister visits schools for the first day of school. Thank you very much. We are adjourned.